got away with it for many years. I mean, before we were brought to justice for it, because at the time it was a great success. I mean, I don't remember at the time anybody going, "Oh, this isn't heavy metal enough." I mean, it was our most successful album by far. It was the most successful tour, so people were buying it, and people were coming to see us, having bought it and listened to it. We had a fairly high up the bill gig at Reading Festival, which went down really well. I mean, now you hear people say, well, it's soft rock and all the rest of it, but at the time that really wasn't happening. I mean, at the time it was clearly, yes, it was a bit of a change of direction, and it was the only time we actually made a decision to go in a particular direction, and that was to go in a more commercial direction. That was definitely a decision that was made. I mean, that was made whilst John Sykes was still in the band, and The Cage would have been a similar album even if he'd still been in the band. Two of the tracks were recorded with him still in the band, so I mean he was up for that as well. So I mean we decided to do a more commercial album. I mean, exactly how it was going to be, we didn't know. I mean, it was a very different sort of approach. We got a producer who was sort of had done a lot of pop, and suddenly it was like, well, you had to submit songs, and they were going to be compared to some cover songs that were also in there, and you weren't necessarily going to get your songs on the album. I mean, every song had to compete to get on the album. So it was a very different thing. We played to a click track. I mean, it was very regimented. It was, and to be honest, after what we'd been through, it was great to do it, and now, I see on YouTube comments like, oh, this was, they went really off the ball here. But yeah, I don't remember it at the time. It didn't feel like it at the time. It seemed like, nobody in the band certainly was in any way not up for it. And it was great fun to do. Yeah. I don't think we would have carried on in that direction. I think it was probably a one-off. But, it was, I don't remember. It was, I think it's a good album. I mean, it's not my favourite Tygers album by any stretch of the imagination. And I think there are things about it which date it now in a way that isn't good. I don't like the electronic drums on some of it. I think they really sound very sort of 80s.
Well, it really does. The electronic drums give you that 80s flavor. But listen, Lonely at the Top, Paris by Air, I mean, those to me are classic Tiger songs. And of course Love Potion number 9, but I love those ones. So the album comes out and you say you have this successful tour and it's very successful. And of course Love Potion number 9 has, success over in the States and in Canada. Why was the band not able to establish themselves in North America? Because really, you're not Ozzy Osbourne until you're Ozzy Osbourne at Madison Square Garden. You're not, Def Leppard until you're Def Leppard at the LA Coliseum and stuff. Why could the Tygers not make that move? You had the songs.
Yeah, well, we thought that finally we might actually get to go to America. Having made that album, we thought, well, that's got to be suitable really for the American market. It wasn't necessarily sort of specifically targeted at that. It was deliberately commercial, but it wasn't deliberately American. But we did think, having made it, that we might finally persuade MCA to send us there. But with them, it was like they always sort of thought, well, when you get the record sales, you can go. And we would always say, well, you don't get the record sales until you go. You need to be out there promoting it. And but I think a lot of it had to do with, as I say, in those days, it cost money to tour. and to tour America cost a lot of money. And, I think they probably wanted to see some more commercial success with the recordings before they were prepared to invest that money. And
was
and of course,
MCA was MCA the right label for the band? Because MCA wasn't, you look back historically, they're not really a hard rock label, right?
Well, at the time that we signed to them, we were happy to be on a major label. I mean, whether they were the right label or not, I think, there were problems with them. They were largely the sort of UK office of an American label. We were actually signed to the American label, not to the UK label. The UK label didn't sign acts. They were kind of like a sort of UK office that what they were used to doing was, sorting out stuff for American bands when they came over here. It was a bit of a new departure for them to start signing things, really. So, there were some issues. They didn't have, when we first signed to them, they didn't really have a sort of great press department or any of that. But I don't really, if you say, well, would it have been better not to have signed to MCA? Well, then, who would we have signed to? You've got to sort of think in terms of what the alternative would have been.
Atlantic, Capitol.
Yeah, but I mean, none of those people offered us a deal at the time.
True.
It was very much it was a bit of a sort of scramble. You had, I think, was it Vertigo signed Def Leppard, which I think they're a Universal label. EMI signed Maiden. And then there was a bit of a scramble for sort of other labels who were interested in it to sign some of the other bands who were around. And that's how we came to sign to MCA. But all of the major record labels were not interested particularly in new wave of British heavy metal at the time. Some of them were, and some of them weren't. It wasn't really it wasn't a feeding frenzy of labels wanting to sign us. I mean, we didn't have it wasn't a bidding war to sign the Tygers. In fact, we actually were signed to Neat Records, really, and we originally got signed to MCA through Neat Records, not directly. And it took a bit of doing to get rid of Neat, to be honest, out of the picture.
Neat has the first singles and so on and so forth. The Cage comes out and it does well, and then the band breaks up, basically.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm skipping a step in there, but there was no next album, at least not from this lineup. What happens there? Why was there not a 1983 album?
Yeah, well, it kind of all went pear-shaped, really. It's, because it's difficult to overemphasize how well it was going, and not just in terms of, the profile of the band and everything, but I mean, that lineup, the tour, the Cage tour, was a great thing to do with a band was a great band to be in. We were, Fred Purser was a really good musician, and he, we kind of the rest of us had learned, we'd had a couple of years of doing this. We'd sort of played bigger and bigger gigs. It was a much more professional band, and it was very tight, and we all got on very well. I think we were a pretty difficult bunch of people, really. I mean, the original four and all the people who joined, I think, we were all quite difficult people. We could sort of have an argument in an empty room, most of us, and we argued a lot. And, that there were times when it was quite unpleasant. But that time actually wasn't. But the issue really was that we didn't want to do Cage 2, and MCA did want us to do Cage 2. In fact, I mean, they had got it into their heads that because of the success of Love Potion Number 9, that wouldn't it be a great idea to do a load of metal versions of soul classics? That's kind of that was the way they were thinking, and we just wouldn't do it. So, that's where we were with MCA. They were basically saying we will only put any money into this if you basically make the cage again, but even more so, we want more soul classics metalled up,
Which is a weird request when you think about it.
Very weird request, but considering the success we'd had, I mean, you could understand where they were coming from. But we didn't want to do it. And they wouldn't put any money in if we didn't do it, and it got to really quite an impasse. I mean, we had recorded a fifth album on demo, but it was all written by Fred. It's another one of those situations where it wasn't really that long since The Cage had come out. I think we were all sort of feeling a bit in the writing department. I think we were all feeling a bit of a loss of confidence because. I mean, some people hadn't managed to get any songs on The Cage, and so suddenly it was like, it's not another album again. It's a sort of fifth album, God, and it was like Fred sort of, he said, "Oh, I've written an album," so it was like, well, okay, we'll do your stuff then. I don't think it's the only time that's ever happened in a band. I mean, I think when Pink Floyd did The Wall, it was like. Right, who's written anything? And Roger Waters had written 2 concept albums and the rest hadn't written a song between them, And we were in a bit of that sort of situation. He'd written an album and we hadn't written anything. So we demoed his songs, and, we had like this little 4-track machine, and, it's really funny now to think that that's how somebody might demo an album when you think of what you can do just on a computer. But we had this little 4-track machine, but we did like a proper demo with live drums and everything. We set the drums up in my bedroom. We got all of the mattresses from all over the house and packed them against the walls, and we made another bedroom the controlled room, and we bounced all the tracks down. Fred was sort of doing all of this stuff with this little 4-track. He was really good at that kind of thing. And he kind of sort of, it was almost like he'd taken over, really. He was kind of, at that point, definitely the major creative force in the band. So we demoed this album, and we couldn't agree anything with MCA, so we thought, well, let's try and get another record label. And we went around, and lots of them were interested. People like EMI were interested, but what they were going to have to do was
buy you out. Yeah.
To buy us out of MCA, yeah. And nobody was interested enough to both buy us out and invest the money that was needed to push the project forward. So it kind of stagnated a bit, and we were sort of really not knowing what to do. And we'd sort of been around a lot of, at the same time, well, to cut a long story short, at the end of the Cage tour, we'd parted company with our management. And so we looked around for new managers and everything. But, we kind of just couldn't move it forward because we couldn't get away from MCA, and MCA wouldn't do anything unless we did what they wanted. So we were just a bit stuck, and the next thing to happen was that a manager came along who knew our agent, and he said, well, I can get you a record deal, but not if Brian and Rob are in the band. And, I mean, it was a terrible thing. I mean,
Why Brian, though? Brian's a good drummer.
Well, I mean, the bizarre thing was what they said was that the other 3 of us were tall, and Brian and Rob weren't tall enough. Can you believe that? I mean, it's mad.
Well, believe it or not, I can believe that, because back then, Image has always been very, very up front in the music business, right? It's
Yeah.
that's you look at Alice Cooper and Kiss were doing, and David Bowie. They all image.